Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the mind's eye, an auditorium of audacity. As always, I'm your host, DJ BJ Turnoff, representing Stitcher Radio and Z Talk Radio. We're talking with two of the biggest badasses living right now, legendary DEA agents Steve Murphy and Javier Peña. You know them. They were famously portrayed on the Netflix show Narcos. We're taking away that shiny, squeaky clean entertainment Hollywood lens, and on tonight's edition, you're going to hear the real story of how they ended the reign of one of the world's most powerful drug traffickers in Pablo Escobar, the man who supposedly controlled 80% of the world's cocaine trafficking in the late 1980s and early 90s. We're going to get down and dirty in the muck with these two men who were there fighting the good fight on the front lines. Steve and Javier are going to tell us about their battles being in the crosshair of Escobar's army of sicarios, the small-time teenage crooks who idolized Escobar and turned Colombia into a war zone. They went around and mercilessly murdered thousands of people, competitors, police, politicians, judges, newspaper editors, and many innocent civilians. No one was safe. Find out how this ragtag duo stopped the narco-terrorists straight from their own mouths with never-heard-before stories, never even depicted on the show, all of which are featured in their new book, Manhunters, How We Took Down Pablo Escobar. Don't move an inch. The Mind's Eye will be right back. You're listening to The Mind's Eye on Z-Talk Radio and Stitcher Radio. From one gangster to the next, on request by his relatives, John Dillinger's body has been set to be exhumed on New Year's Eve. The family believes that the FBI killed the wrong man, and ever since, an imposter has been buried in Dillinger's grave. FBI is claiming BS conspiracy theory. Easy solve. Let's just dig up the body. And while we wait the results, why don't you read a little bit more about this and other great articles on our Facebook and Twitter pages at Mind's Eye Show. You'll also see some information about our guests, retired DEA operatives, Javier Peña and Steve Murphy, the manhunters who took down Pablo Escobar. Hear the real story. Back in a Mind's Eye moment. Legendary DEA operatives Javier Peña and Steve Murphy join the Mind's Eye. To say that this is an honor might be the understatement of the year, gentlemen. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Glad to be here with you, Brian. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you, Brian.
And first and foremost, let me just say thank you for your service from walking the beat, working the prison systems, and obviously ultimately protecting the international streets here. The world is legitimately safer because of you two born in it. Thank you. Thank you, truly. Really do appreciate it.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's the least I can say for everything that you guys have done. So, and I guess that in itself kind of raises a couple points from your new book, and kind of start at the end there, that the death of the world's most wanted man pretty much originally kind of went unnoticed in our neck of the world here immediately afterwards. And then second, the sadder point, which I'm not trying to piss you guys off, but you two were never really officially recognized by the DEA. I mean, all your awards went to your supervisors. Steve, I know you don't do it for the awards, but did you think the TV show Narcos helped you finally give the recognition that you two deserved?
It brought us recognition. I don't know that we deserved it. I mean, we were just doing our job. But the funny thing is, we turned Eric Newman down. He's the creator of Narcos. We turned him down when he first called, because we'd been down this road a couple times with other producers, and they had personal agendas they wanted to use our story for. They weren't interested in telling the truth. But through meeting Eric and doing some research on him, he turns out to be a super guy, and he's one of our best friends now. We're glad we did, but Javier and I actually thought that Narcos was going to be a flop. Shows you how much we know about Hollywood, doesn't it?
Well, I guess good thing you're retired DEA agents, not Hollywood producers. Although you did a great job before, as we said. Javier, without the filter of a government agency and that whole Netflix entertainment lens, did you find writing the book Manhunters, How We Took Down Pablo Escobar, did you find that writing and sharing the story in your own words was cathartic?
You know what? It was good to get some of the stories out there, because obviously, when we watch Narcos, there's a lot of Hollywood involved. But so it was good for me in that you tell your own story, and I think we recognize some of the real heroes in Colombia, and I think we brought up the also the violence that Escobar was doing. So and then obviously we go back to our families, our first work and our careers with DEA. So it was I think it was a good outlet. In other words, to tell the real story of what happened with Pablo Escobar.
Yeah, I can't imagine 30 years ago that you guys were going to think you're going to write a book about it all those years later.
Right.
And appreciate that you do, because you give a whole nother perspective that really has never been seen before. And I found that there were a lot of parallels between you two in your formative years. And both of you came from blue-collared families. Both chose law enforcement over going into family businesses and taking over there. And you both kind of entered law enforcement in your late teens. But in the book, Javier, you write that when you first met Steve, that you didn't really think there was much alike between you two. Now, friends all these years later, do you still think the same thing?
Yeah, no, it is true. And like I said, I didn't know Steve. I had never met him, in our careers. And, he came in from Miami. I was already there. And and usually when you meet your partner at the time and you don't know each other, it's sort of, all right, hey, let me see, let me feel him out. It's like, we're not too sure of each other. I mean, there have been partnerships that were disastrous. Guys didn't get along, hated each other, but I think when Steve and I met, we clicked, and we tell people we're complete opposites. He's very organized, I'm not. So we that was sort of and then all of a sudden, the trust develops, and you can count on him and he can count on me. So it worked out, and we were both assigned to the case. We didn't come in and say, hey, we want to work Pablo Escobar. We were basically assigned to it, not knowing. And to be honest, when I first get to Colombia, I did not know. I had heard of Pablo Escobar. I didn't know who the guy was or what his empire. Later on finding out what he looked like. So it was a learning experience for both of us. And at the end, it worked out, and here we are.
Yeah, I think.
Let me just say, Brian, if you don't mind,
please do.
Javier won't tell you this, but he's got the reason it works, I am organized, but Javier's got a brain like an encyclopedia. He's got the ability to recall relationships, who's responsible for what. It's amazing the recall that he has, and I'm just not that smart. So that's why it worked out so good as a partnership.
Yeah.
We are opposites, but it was a great partnership.
It clicked, and we made it work for us. So that's one of the good things about it.
Yeah, and you're very complimentary of each other. I don't want to put a little wedge in there right now, but in the book, Javier says he writes that he was definitely wary of you in the beginning, but Steve, you were right. You really respected him. You liked him immediately. I mean, how do you feel about that now, knowing that, Steve?
Well, and we've had the same question from other people. He was. Him and his other partner, Gary Sheridan, and actually Gary and I got to be friends first because we had some common acquaintances back in the States. But those two guys were kind of legendary because they were going after Pablo Escobar. So for me, it was exciting, not knowing that's what I was going to be doing when I got there. But, getting assigned to that case to work with those two guys, you just felt like, hey, I just made the A-team. So we became partners there in 1991, and here we are in 2019, and we're still partners.
And all these years later, after reading each other's perspective from the book, Javier, did you learn anything new about Steve?
Yeah, well, I like you said, we were together in Medellin, so I knew a lot of his background. Learned a couple of new things, but I already knew like you said, and being at an embassy setting, I got real close to his wife, Connie, who also helped me out in my office. I would organize my desk, and I'd give her I'd go to Medellin, I'd give her my checkbook, pay my bills. So it got to be like a little family. So again, it was just the best of both worlds, I think.
And what about Steve? Same question to you. Did you find anything new about Javier or his perspective during the hunt?
No, not really. We were so close that we know about each other's families. He knows about all my kids. In fact, my kids still call him Uncle Javier. So we knew a lot of the personal stories about each other already, and our backgrounds, and what led each of us into law enforcement and then into DEA. So there were some additional details that I either didn't remember or had forgotten that he told me about certain incidences, but no real revelations, to be honest with you.
And that's why I really love the book Manhunters, because it is from your perspective. You do see how what led you there, and we love Narcos, and obviously there was it was only really scratching the surface personally of you two, and that's why I really enjoyed the book. And I kind of want to stay there for a little bit because you two are so important. We don't really get to hear about you two as much as Escobar, sadly. So let's just stay there and highlight you guys for a little bit more. So most stories kind of they start with boy meets girl or whatever you're into, whatever.
Be careful now. Be careful.
Exactly. That's why whatever you're into. But not this one. Not Mr. Peña's, of course, who Steve dubs the eternal bachelor over here. Javier's path it started to the DEA and Colombia. It starts with him running away from a girl. Javier, tell us that story.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, and that is true. And I try. You know what? I had a problem with this. Should I mention it or not? But you know what? I think it was important in that. That's what led me to. Hey, I need to leave this area. I grew up small town, border town. I'm Hispanic, and the girl, and it was just. I wish it wouldn't have happened. It happened. Certain situations. It was the pregnancy, and then I find out it wasn't a pregnancy, and so then all of a sudden and I was at the sheriff's office teaching part time. Then all of a sudden I had a dean come in to see me. He says, "Hey, you know what? We're not gonna hire you anymore." And I think I was doing a good job teaching part-time classes. I was at the sheriff's office. I was a lieutenant at the time, and I think the girl got to him and pretty much badmouthed me, and then I was like, wow, I need to leave this area. And you know what? It was good for me, and I realized I needed to leave, and I wanted to leave. It was, and that's why when I joined DEA, and I didn't even know what DEA was, I found out about it in a posted in the bulletin board. And then when I get hired, it was like, I'm only going to do a couple of years, and then here I am 30 years afterwards. So, yeah, it is important. And like I said, it's, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it because, it's her life. She went on. We haven't seen each other, heard of each other. So I know she eventually got married, has a family, and, the best of luck to her. So.
And then you have Pedro Pascal playing you on Narcos, so I think you got a little revenge there. Outside of also obviously getting Escobar and becoming, one of the most well-known DEA agents, also. But mainly because Pedro Pascal. What did you think? Do you think he did you justice there? Was he better working or worse looking?
I know. Well, go on. Hey, I did look like him in my younger days. So anyway, not now. But you know what? He was an amazing guy. We got to meet him. I spent about a week with him, and we took him to our DEA training facilities in Quantico, and we talked a lot. My growing up, and you know what? He even he lived here in San Antonio for a while, so we got along. I told him how I was like. In the TV, the only problem is, I'm not a smoker, and I think he's drinking like every day. I drink, but not as much as on TV. And you know what? And I was single at the time, so I dated a lot. not informants, not hookers, not
But every other woman in Colombia was fair game.
I was single, so yep. So I think he did a good job, and I think there's one scene a buddy of mine noticed it. It's just like you, and so I think they put a bill on him, and Pedro Pascal says, "Here I go, I got stuck with a bill again." So I'm always like, "Hey, half and half, man. All right, you had to," So he did a good job, and he's a great actor, and I have the utmost respect for Pedro, and we talk. So he was good. He was very good.
And what about the actor that played you, Steve? Did you ever spend time together the way that Javier and Pedro did?
Yeah, absolutely. They all flew in together here to. I'm in just outside of D.C. in Boyd Holbrook. We just really hit it off because I grew up in Tennessee and then southern West Virginia, and he's from eastern Kentucky, which is very similar to West Virginia. Great personalities, easy to get along with, very easy to talk to. Doesn't come across as pretentious or holier than thou or anything like that. But what was kind of neat about it, I don't know if you remember the Hatfields and McCoys trilogy with Kevin Costner that came out several years ago. Mm-hmm. Boyd played a guy named Cap Hatfield in that series. Well, my family, on my father's side, my great grandfather is John C. Hatfield. My great grandmother is Sarah McCoy. They're the two that married that stopped the Hatfields and McCoy feud.
Oh wow!
So we kind of joked around that he played my great uncle in the Hatfields and McCoys, and he played me in Narcos. So we're waiting to see who in our family he's going to play next.
Yeah, geez, I mean, one hell of a lineage over there. Wow. At least you have your own personal actor, and I guess he went all method acting. He nailed your mustache, right? I mean, that was a big part of the role. I imagine you're like, this is how it's done.
And I mean, he's just such a nice guy. We were out in Hollywood for the premiere of season 2, and he brought his mom out for it, and we got to meet her. And in fact, we stay in touch with each other. So he's in New York now with his wife and baby, and we try to catch up with him when we're in New York. But he's making so many movies now. And the same with Pedro. It's hard to catch up with those guys. They're really, really busy.
Yeah, they're all over the place, and you guys are now going to be all over the place too. So. Let's still focus on you for a little bit. Javier before said that, as he said that he didn't mean to go to Colombia. He wasn't really wanted to go. Didn't really know about Escobar. But Steve, I mean, this is another part where I guess you two are opposites here. I mean, you went to Colombia with Escobar in mind. Go into a little bit of your background. What led you to the DEA and ultimately to Escobar, Steve?
I started out as a small town cop in southern West Virginia, a little place called Bluefield, West Virginia. We only had a 35-man department. But I was always intrigued by narcotics cases. Now, they were extremely small. I mean, if you were getting an ounce of weed or I'd like to joke around, the most cocaine I ever saw before I joined DEA was 2 ounces of powder cocaine. The first undercover case I got to work on with DEA from Miami, we went to the Turks and Caicos Islands and picked up 400 kilos. So I went from 2 ounces to 880 pounds of coke. But kind of got bored with the city police, and it just, it didn't pay anything, to be honest with you. And I was going through a divorce that time, and I had 2 sons, and I just needed, I was already working 2 extra jobs, trying to make ends meet, and an opportunity came up to join the railroad police, which is now Norfolk Southern Corporation. So I did that and moved to Norfolk, Virginia. But, and I'm certainly not downing the railroad police because they've got a tough job, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. So one of my buddies, a guy named Pete Ramey, who's former Virginia State Trooper, started telling me about DEA, and it just sounded really exciting to me. And so I applied. It took me 2 years to get the job. Didn't really ask to go to Miami, but that's where I was sent. Turned out my wife and I loved it down there. So we're there for 4 years, and in 1989, my partner was shot in a deal gone bad, and the informant was killed. And, so we got through that. But then after we'd been there about 4 years, my wife came to me. She's a registered nurse, and she was always working in the cardiac cath units or the trauma units and things like that. And she said, it's been an exciting life down here. What's the next most exciting thing we can do? I said, well, hey, we can go to Colombia. And she's like, are you an idiot? she didn't want anything to do with that to start with. But I had a friend down in Barranquilla that I'd been working with, and he came to Miami. So I set up dinner between the three of us, and she peppered him with questions for about 3 hours. And, a couple weeks after that, she said, "Hey, do you still want to go?" And I said, "Sure." She said, "Well, if we're going to do it, let's do it while we're young." So, it was kind of her idea to start with. She planned the idea of let's try something different, more exciting.
Yeah, I think you two had the definitions of exciting very different in that original conversation, but it's glad that you guys met somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah.
Now, Javier, while you're, I want to say you weren't waiting for Steve, but you were in Colombia for the 3 years before Steve got there. Tell us firsthand some of the events that you saw with Pablo Escobar. How did he turn Bogota into a legitimate war-torn city?
Yeah, great question. And Pablo Escobar, and I'll always remember that start of that first terrorism war, and he used the tactic of car bombs. And I tell people we had never heard of a car bomb. I mean, you hear about it in back then, Middle East, but down in South America, no one knew what a car bomb was. So he employed that tactic, which was, what is a drug trafficker doing, putting bombs, targeting innocent people? And that's the first concept that we realized, that this is no ordinary trafficker. And then, like I said, then going after the police, which, we had seen that before. And then, like I said, targeting innocent people at public places. Then, the putting of a bomb on a commercial airline. Who would do such a thing? Then what broke the camel's back was when he killed the next president who was running for president of Colombia, Luis Carlos Galan. That really is like, Colombia said, wow, this is, this guy is out of control. Everything else he did was out of control. But that killing of that presidential candidate is what it basically told Colombia, we need to get serious. They were serious. But after that, and believe me, and I'm not taking, the innocent people, that also, I mean, that just stands out in my mind, why innocent people are getting killed by Pablo Escobar. And at the beginning, it was learning experience. We really didn't realize how big this guy was. There was a lot of corruption. So how do we deal with that? Which I think we later on we found the solution for that. So it was many new variables of how we're going to do this. And then, like you said, then all of a sudden, we hadn't realized this guy had, connections all over the world. Then like I said, it was just the perfect of everything, the perfect of cocaine distribution, the perfect of narco terrorism at its worst, which is really at its best. So it was all of these factors coupled together made this guy invincible, and we were trying, but he was always a step ahead of us. And like I said, he had politicians in his back pocket. He was paying a lot of people. And then also is the money that was being garnered from cocaine sales during this time. I tell people the kilo in the mid-'80s in Miami, and I refer always, to the movie Scarface, and Blow, because people, a lot of people have seen those movies, and I say, hey, that was real. That stuff was going on, the money, $80,000 for 1 kilo in the United States. So it was billions and billions of dollars coming back to Pablo Escobar in Medellin. And at the beginning, in Medellin, people loved Pablo Escobar. People were afraid to talk about him, to go up against him. If we would do raids, search warrants on Pablo, people would hide him. They would usher him out. They would warn him. He had people in the neighborhood close to where we're living at the search block. So, like you said, it was just a lot of new things for us that we had never seen before.
And some people were thinking that some of the Colombians kind of looked at him like Robin Hood. I mean, how can people do that? How can people love a known murderer? I mean, from your experience, Javier, being there, I mean, how were they able to look at him and then to know he was a murderer, and then also looking at him like a Robin Hood?
Yeah. And the other thing we missed was his sicarios, the assassins he had working for him. And remember, he was considered that Robin Hood, but because he gave the poor people, built them houses. There's still a neighborhood under Pablo Escobar's name, gave them money, was given the Catholic Church money. So his PR was based on, I'm going to, provide soccer fields, I'm going to build hospitals, I'm going to try to convince the people I am the best person in the world. And he accomplished it because of the money. But, the money for him was no problem. And it's a special, and I interviewed one of the sicarios when he started the bounties on police officers. And I'll talk to people, I said, I hate to say the figure, but it was $100 for a human body, for a human head, the killing of police officers, the police officers that are saving our lives, offering $100. And this thug, I don't call him even a kid, 15 years old, had already confessed to me 10 police officers that he killed. And one thing I'll never forget, he says, I love Pablo Escobar, I will die, and I will kill for Pablo Escobar. He has taken care of my mother. He told me, my mom has a house, she's got food, as long as she's happy, he says. And then the other thing, he says, I'll be dead by 22, 23 years old. So if you multiply that attitude by 500 sicarios, that's what we're dealing with.
I didn't really get that also from that perspective, because what do you think just staying with the sicarios, I mean, with this guy, I mean, and this was emblematic of all of them, but, don't you think that their mother would prefer to have them alive than to have, whatever money that they were given? I mean, it's kind of like an ass backwards perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. But again, if they're in poverty, and remember that, they idolized it. And that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they just idolized Pablo Escobar. So everybody wanted to be his friend. Everybody wanted to work for him. So he had no problem getting more people. And it was, hey, you're going to be doing this job, or there's a family here down the block, go wipe them out, man. They do it, under the orders of Pablo Escobar. So everybody wanted to work for Pablo Escobar. He, like I said, his PR, and I hate to use the word PR, but he had that campaign going in Medellin. And obviously, he had politicians, and then he started threatening people. So a lot of those people did not have they had to help him out. I remember one of the judges, he refused the money from Pablo Escobar, then they killed him and his family members. So, that gets out. That word gets out. So people start, what, I'll help out Pablo Escobar and take my $50,000. So that was hard for us.
Yeah, plata or plomo, right? Either silver or lead. You agree with him, or you're going to get killed. And to kind of piggyback off what Javier was saying before and how he evaded capture for so long, one lesson that Steve brought up in the book was that he learned early on was that the rich and the affluent, they abide by a different criminal justice system. Steve, I mean, do you think Escobar's wealth was the biggest reason why he was able to evade authorities for so long?
It had an awful lot to do with it, but his business model, people like to say, well, if Pablo was such a smart guy that if he had applied his business model to legitimate business, he would still been a multimillionaire. We don't agree with that because his business model was, Brian, you go out here and do what I tell you, and if you don't, I'm just going to kill you. Well, you can't, obviously you can't do that in legitimate business, right?
Right.
So I hate to hear people giving him credit where the credit is really not due. I think the money had a lot to do with his power and influence, but the violence, I think, had even more to do with it. Just They were brutal. Pablo liked to leave messages, the torture that was involved, the rape, just the heinous crimes, the dismemberment. We know the story about the Moncada and Galliano brothers that he killed in the prison, which is what led to his escape, and that they just dismembered the bodies. And the stories are that one, they incinerated the bones, the other is that they chopped the human meat up and made it into a stew and fed it to the guard dogs. I mean, there's just such heinous crimes out there that normal people, we just don't think that. We don't want to believe that there are people out there like that, but unfortunately there are.
Do you think he was a coward of sorts because, he did all these horrible, terrible things, but he wouldn't take credit for a lot of them, like the shopping center bombings? I mean, do you think he was a coward of sorts, Steve? Absolutely.
There's no question in my mind. And in fact, when we do our shows around the world, we point that fact out. In my opinion, he's nothing more than a coward. If he wanted, there's this myth out here that he's this devoted family man. Well, that's not true either. He got the sweetheart deal of a lifetime, where he got to build his own prison, which we eventually found out was more like a country club. He only had to do 5 years in prison, and he's absolved of every other crime he committed in his entire life, including thousands of murders. I mean, there's no better deal I've ever heard of in my life.
And he got to keep all his wealth and assets, didn't he?
Exactly. There were no stipulations whatsoever to take any of his assets. So all he had to do was 5 years. You could do that standing on your head if you knew you were going to be a free man. Then you could watch your children grow up, get married, watch your grandchildren, play with your family. I mean, have all the material possessions that anybody could ever dream of. But we know that's not the road that he chose. His ego, he couldn't control his ego. He liked the power. He liked people bowing down to him, being afraid of him. Well, in my book, that doesn't make you a hero. That makes you a coward.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then also, like Steve said, living in a country club atmosphere. Wow. We got to visit the prison. There's no prison. There was one side that had some bars, but it was one side just in case people were to see, but the rest was just that country club setting. People visiting him, pictures of him and his family at his apartment. And his apartment, there's a great photo of me and Steve on the bench, and it's right in front of his apartment and just overlooking the city of Medellin. So it's no prison. He can do whatever he wanted.
In my opinion, one of the biggest injustices in the last 30 years was allowing him to do all of that. And I mean, he didn't even have to wait for his family to see them. Didn't he have like a telescope where he could see them from certain sides of the prison?
Yeah, he had it mounted on the railing around his patio.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, if he wanted to go spend the night with his family, he went. If he wanted them to come and spend the night with him in the prison, they came up. It's just so much ridiculousness that went on there. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in jail, Brian. You don't have to own up to it if you did. But if you went to jail, would you expect to have a jacuzzi bathtub in your prison cell?
If I had the money he did, sure.
That's what he had. I mean,
he had kitchen, he had cooks there, whatever he wanted to eat, and then the famous parties. I mean, we found photos of people coming in partying with him. There's a famous letter from a woman offering her daughter so he could have sex with her. Unbelievable, the stuff that we were finding. It was just, you don't see this. And, we said we were making it up. We're not. It was just, unbelievable, his living conditions at the so-called prison.
And that was her 13-year-old daughter she offered up.
Oh, God. Yeah. There was multiple times in the book where I'm saying, what the hell is wrong with Colombia? I mean, good Lord. I mean, something like that. And then just to skip forward for a brief moment, the sicario who got out of jail later on, who was then giving tours of the people he killed and the massacre sites. I mean, good Lord, what is wrong with Colombia? What I don't get them.
Well, yeah, I know. And you know what? It is. When I went back, I went back and was showing the Narcos, the producer, director, where everything was. I was disappointed in that, but I can see Colombia's point. Like the search block we lived in, the area they demolished that. The prison system has been demolished. I don't know. It's just wish they would have kept something for. I'm a big history buff, but I think they don't want to be known with a connotation of in history. But then, and we got to bring up, and Steve and I bring it up also, the other point. Steve, you want to, with the president,
right.
What would you do? There's another point. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another way to look at this, Brian, and we point this out to our audiences as well. Put yourself in the shoes, and first of all, Colombia, we don't want to stigmatize the entire country because I went down, the only Colombians I'd ever met were the ones I put in jail, and I know it's wrong to do it, but you stereotype an entire country because of that. When we got down there, my wife and I, we found Colombia to be beautiful. The people, the honest, hardworking people are some of the nicest, most accepting people in the world. As long as you're trying to get along in their culture and their country, man, they welcomed us with open arms. But when it comes to Escobar, put yourself in the place of President Gaviria. He's running a platform. He's pro-extradition. He's the candidate that took over after Galan was murdered by Pablo's henchmen. And so can you imagine the pressure that was on him from all sides, from his own political party, but especially the opposing political party, the citizens of Colombia saying, hey, you said you were going to stop this. You were going to put Pablo in jail. You were going to stop the bombings. When are you going to stop the murder? I mean, the pressure just had to be enormous on Gaviria's shoulders. Now, I'm not making excuses for him, just trying to get people to think, what would you do if you were in the president's shoes and you wanted to stop it? So right. It's a little bit of an explanation as to why they offered this sweetheart deal. I mean, we make fun of it, but when the shoe's on the other foot, it's a different series. And you know what? When Pablo surrendered for that 1 year, the bombing stopped. So he did. Gaviria, for 1 year, was able to accomplish what he said he was going to, even though it was a ridiculous plea agreement that they had to agree to.
Right. And also, and we tell people, when he challenged his country and actually won, that's what we meant by the terrorism, the bombing, the killings. So now he had that power where he calls up the president and says, yep, hey, Mr. President, I'm willing to stop the bombing campaign. It was like, wow, because it was a daily occurrence. So, thank you. Hold on, these are my conditions. Obviously, remember the embassy, none of us liked it. I didn't like it. What about all my friends he killed? What about all the innocent people he killed? So basically, what we say, we had lost, and Pablo Escobar had won. So, again, there's another side to it. We just want to make everybody aware of it. But, it's a hard situation.
Yeah, stuck between a rock and a hard place. I definitely wouldn't want to be, walk in that shoes right there. Who knows what? I mean, like you said, the bombing stopped. So on some level, he's right. But of course, he was still, doing business. Watching him surrender on TV must have been pretty surreal for you. You must have felt pretty betrayed.
It was, and we were. I remember that feeling. It was like, why did we go after him? What, we should have done this at the beginning and people would have lived, but yeah, it was. And then everybody was upset, the cops. So all the innocent people, all my police buddies who got killed, that was all in vain. All for what? To watch this guy make a mockery, and it was a mockery of his surrender. Chopper takes off, the press of the world there. It was just unbelievable.
And what about you, Steve? I mean, you just got there 3 days before Escobar surrendered. I mean, what was going through your mind? You probably didn't even fully unpack yet. I mean, how did you react to the news?
Well, I just figured Pablo had found out Murphy was in country. He might as well just go ahead and give up, No, but this is the other side, because I didn't know all the background that Javier had been through, and I wasn't aware of all the devastation and murders and all that. So when he surrendered, I thought, man, this is great. That's the best thing that could have happened. The guy's in jail. But then I come in the embassy and I see, all these dejected looks and disappointment. And then you start learning the history and you realize, oh, now I see, because just like Javier said, all those police officers who gave their lives in Colombia, and not just police, military, and innocent citizens who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, that was all in vain. So, I mean, I had a lot to learn when I got there. I knew who Pablo was. I'd peripherally worked some cases, never anything up to his level, but, they were associated with the Medellin cartel. But it was a big learning curve when I first got down there.
Let's hold it right there. Let's just take a quick commercial break. It's a good place to stop. When we get back, we'll talk about Escobar's escape, and then, of course, Steve and Javier's capture of him. The Mind's Eye will return in a moment. The Mind's Eye is back. We're talking manhunters with legendary DEA agents Javier Peña and Steve Murphy, the agents who took down Pablo Escobar. Now, Escobar, we're going to talk about his escape momentarily, but Escobar knew you two by your names. He called you the two gringos. I mean, is that do you consider that a badge of honor, Javier?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I do. I do. And also on the other side, it's one of the scariest moments in our lives. As Pablo Escobar wants to have you killed. So it is like you said, it's exciting. But then, wow, this guy's killing anybody who stood in their way. So it's there's a double negative in that one. So, but I think, and a lot of people will ask us, how did we survive? And obviously, like Steve has a good answer with. Go ahead, Steve, and I'll chime in. Yeah.
Well, there's we get every presentation we do, Brian, around the world, and this is our fourth year. We're ending our fourth year now. We average about 75 shows a year. Every presentation we do a Q&A at the end. So people can ask us any questions, just like you're doing. I mean, we don't shy away. We really try not to get in legalization because that's just an argument rather than a discussion. But this question comes up quite a bit. How did you guys survive? Because we're not tough guys. We're not supermen. We're just a couple of small town country boys that got to work a really big drug case. So there's several reasons that we give as to why we think we survived. First is Javier and I are both Christians, and we give God the praise and the glory for keeping us alive down there, because there was some extremely hairy situations that we're not sure how we survived them. But, we figured he's got a plan for everybody, and his plan was not for us to die while we were in Colombia. So that's number one. The second is, you've heard of Kiki Camarena. Well, the Colombians were aware of how the United States government reacted when Kiki was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in Mexico, where the president shut down the border between the U.S. and Mexico until he got cooperation out of the Mexican government. So, Pablo, you got to remember, his whole business is about making more money. So he knew if they shut the border down and really got serious about this war on drugs, he was going to be in a bad position. So we think Kiki's legacy had a lot to do with keeping us alive. Third, we were a heck of a lot younger back then. We could run faster and jump higher at that age. And again, not tough guys, but we could, take care of ourselves. And then the fourth reason, and this is just as important as number one, is we worked with a very elite group of Colombian National Police officers. This is called the Dijin unit, D-I-J-I-N. These are the guys that we lived with, we slept in the same quarters with, we shared meals with, we went to the bars together, went and faced some of the dangers, not nearly the amount of dangers that they did, but some. And these are the guys that we knew when the firefight started, when the bullets start flying, we knew they'd stand there and fight. They wouldn't run off and leave us because of this mutual trust and respect we'd developed for each other. But on the other hand, they also knew that Javier and I wouldn't run away either. We'd stand and fight with them. So those are the main reasons we think we survived down there. And again, not tough guys at all, man. I mean, right now we're old, overweight men going bald.
Yeah. And Brian, yeah, my biggest fear, and I think I've mentioned, but it's just like an state were the car bombs. I mean, at the beginning, he was placing them on our base when we would leave. There was one night where we were there, right outside the base. There was a little hamburger joint, beer, burgers were there, and there was a roadblock set up. So somebody fired a shot from the road. And wow, all hell broke loose. At the end of that firefight, because everybody was armed. I'll always remember there were some uniformed guys checking out some civilian guys who were undercover cops. Everybody pulls out guns. Everybody starts shooting at each other. In the morning, there were 3 people, innocent people, dead because of the friendly fire, but created by Pablo Escobar.
You both had a bunch of close calls. One that you talked about before. I mean, what was the closest call you came to dying in the reign of Escobar? Steve, let's start with you there.
Oh,
if you want to talk about it, I know that some of these things are a bit sensitive. So.
Honestly, it doesn't bother me because I guess I'm kind of crazy. They didn't hire us because we were real smart. But I think it doesn't bother me because, I always felt like we were doing the right thing. We were trying to help our country. We were trying to help the Colombian country. And we were trying to rid the world of this evil. I mean, this guy had 80% of the world's cocaine market, But I guess maybe you go out on the Huey gunships with the Colombian National Police and, you're coming into these ranches and whatever location you're going to raid. Sometimes there were shots fired, sometimes there weren't. And it's a little bit hairy doing that. Sometimes we'd go out on mountain patrols where they fly in and drop you out on the top of the mountain, and you'd hump the mountains all day long, looking for labs, looking for anything related to Pablo Escobar. And you never knew what you were going to run into. Of course, we had about a 60-man patrol, so we were pretty well armed. I think I probably worried about my wife quite a bit while she was in Bogota because she was there by herself while I was living up in Medellin. But she's a pretty tough girl. I don't think she was ever worried for her own safety. She knows how to handle herself. But it was just, and I know a lot of people think this is going to sound stupid or very crazy when I say it, but it was really exciting. I mean, if you're going to get into law enforcement, especially as a narcotics agent, and you get the opportunity to go after the biggest guy in the world, the world's first narco-terrorist, it was just pure excitement every day. Were we scared? Darn right I was scared. But, the good Lord gave us the ability to deal with fear and still keep your wits about you, and that's what keeps you alive.
Yeah, you both talk a lot in the book about being scared to death. You bring it up quite often, and you were really open with your emotions, and, I really respect the hell out of that. And also, there's also people like my father, who's a retired NYPD captain. I guess he's kind of the quintessential image of a police officer, stoic, doesn't really like to talk about his time, completely understandable, of course. And, that kind of image translates a lot to people who serve in some capacity. So I was really surprised on how open both of you were talking of your emotions, being scared to death, being terrified. So, Steve, particularly, I think you got emotional also talking about, you were talking about Connie there before. You describe her as one of the bravest women I've ever met. And by the way, the details of the book, no doubt about that. Do you think you would have survived Colombia without her or made it through the whole time?
If I'd been there without her, I'd probably come out as an alcoholic. We worked really hard, but we played really hard back then. She has an innate ability to keep me grounded. We've got this thing with Narcos, and now the book coming out, and we get to travel around the world. And like you were introducing us as famous DEA agents. We don't see it like that, but it's nice when people say that about you. But she makes sure it never goes to my head. She's like, "Hey, Mr. Hollywood, take the trash out and wash the car while you're outside."
Yeah, that's a good partner for sure. And we've been talking a lot about violence, and let's stick with some of the positive parts right here. Things weren't always scary. There were a lot of good times. You said you worked hard and you party hard. Javier, tell us a little bit about what life was like when you weren't working on those rare instances.
It was great. We had a great embassy family, and when you're foreign, I had the embassy. You stick together. There's always the Friday night, the Marine parties where everybody goes out to the Marine house, have a great time. And like I said, some of my really good friends, Colombians, we go out to their fincas, their farms. Oh, beautiful farms up in the mountains. You spend the weekend with them. They treated you just like their brother. And I always will remember that. Some of the best friends always took care of us. And so I really enjoyed it. Bogota, it's a beautiful city. It's got the mountains. Medellin was just also beautiful. Then you could also go to Cartagena, which was the playground of Colombia, and it was always safe because it was a big tourist attraction. So on the social side, I mean, it was beautiful. Colombians, great people. We hung out with them, and most of my Colombian friends, they knew who I was. They knew it was DEA. They never said anything to anybody. Kept me safe. Like I said, we're visiting their ranches, so it's a beautiful country, and the cops were just great with us. It just I had never really understood that relationship, but they treated us just like their own. So kudos to them.
And Steve, do you want to tell the audience what the circle of gold is?
Well, that's a lot of bad memories. Is what
the ones that you can remember, I imagine.
Yeah, so whenever an agent or a DEA employee was being transferred out of Colombia, of course we'd have going away parties, and our parties were pretty nice. We had tons of food, we had bodyguards everywhere, we had mariachi bands come in. We might even have a couple waiters or waitresses in there that serve the food and clean up afterwards so we could have fun. But at the end of the evening, the tradition was called the Circle of Gold. And so you'd get all the agents in a circle, and the gold was Henry Cuervo Gold tequila. So we would pop the top, throw the top away, and you just started doing shots right out of the bottle, and you just kept going until the bottle was empty. One night, we went through, I think it was 5 bottles of Cuervo Gold. It was a very, very ugly night.
Oh, boy. And I can't imagine what the after party after Escobar must have been like if you're just doing 5 bottles in one night. It kind of brings me back to my old fraternity days. We had a game called, it was the same exact game, just not classy like Circle of Gold. We just called it Chug It. So, but it was the same exact premise. So it's good to see some things never stop, That's obviously there were, like you said, there are good times and sticking with the good the good aspect of it. Let's talk more about the actual capture of Escobar. But to do that, we have to talk about he like you said before, he surrendered. He was in jail. He was in prison of his own making. He escapes jail. Now you're back on the hunt. Javier, did you find that to have conflicting emotions when he escaped?
No. Oh, wow. No, my emotions were I was one of the happiest guys in the world, and everybody at the embassy, our office, it was just that feeling, and that feeling was we're going to have another chance to go after Pablo Escobar. So everybody was excited, was happy, was energetic. So it wasn't like so it gave us another chance, and I just cannot explain that feeling, but it was a great feeling, and that's what we wanted.
Did you have a similar perspective, Steve?
Absolutely. It was, and probably not as strong as Javier and Gary's because they'd been there so much longer than I had. But you knew what was at stake. You knew what was at stake with this, and here was another opportunity to really go after this guy. And you know what? The public opinion was on our side. The Colombian government was, hey, whatever you guys need. We brought in, we didn't, but the ambassador brought in the U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6. He brought in the U.S. Army's Delta Force. Those guys were up in Medellin at the base for 18 months living there. The problem was, the rules of engagement for them, actually the rules of engagement for all of us was that we were not supposed to leave the base. But Javier and I, we discussed that at the very beginning. If we can't leave the base, we can't do our job. So he and I made a pact together that, we're going to do what we have to do to get the job done. Now, the Delta and the SEALs, those guys are military, so they follow orders. And we weren't breaking any laws. We were breaking some rules and policies, some DEA policies, but we never broke the law down there. But it just gave you a new sense of purpose. My wife understood the significance of what we were doing, so she was, never gave me a hard time about going up to Medellin, being gone. I think one time I was gone 5 weeks in a row without coming home to see her. So everybody was on board for what we were doing.
So now you're chasing him again. He's still evading capture. Steve, you wrote in the book that your biggest obstacle in the search for Escobar was often your fellow American. Do you mind expanding on that a bit more?
Well, yeah, there was a certain three-letter agency that we just really didn't get along with. It was stupid jealousy. It wasn't the entire agency. It was the leader of that agency did not want to recognize the crossover between the narcotics groups and the insurgent groups. Well, you know what? When you've got insurgents providing protection on Pablo Escobar's cocaine labs, in law enforcement, we call that a clue, right? But this particular guy didn't want to do it. He didn't want to share information. It was really stupid and ugly, and the only people that paid for that were the citizens of Colombia, because it just impeded us from doing our job. Luckily, we had a boss in Joe Toft, our country attaché, who had our backs, who would go to bat for us, and the ambassador was a guy you wanted to work for. He's not bashful. He'll get your face in a heartbeat. He's a big man. He's about 6'7", 6'8", former lieutenant commander in the Navy, not bashful at all. And he made everybody get in the same sandbox and play well together. So that's what that references to there.
And that same three-letter agency, which none of us are naming here, they did threaten to haul Javier off to jail. What's the story behind that story, Javier?
And it's all jealousy, yeah. And it was a threat, and it was all over a cassette tape when we first intercepted Pablo Escobar. And we were the ones who came up with a frequency, so I gave it to them. And when we intercepted him, I brought in Colonel Martinez. Colonel, I got good news for you. So we played the tape, and he was just his face lit up, because there was about 3 or 4 months we had not heard Pablo Escobar. Wow! So it just, everybody again was renewed. We have him. He's talking, and he was talking every day at 5 o'clock. So anyway, so when the Colonel says, "Hey, Javier," leaves the office, calls me, "Hey, can I get a copy of the tape?" I said, "Of course, Colonel. It's, So I said, "Hey, guys, can I get a copy?" Just the tape, yeah. I mean, and then all of a sudden, I get a call, and it's that agency. You know what? I'll tell you. It starts with a C and ends with an A. Well, so you can figure it out. The boss. So I talked to him, and he says, "If you turn over that copy of the tape, I will indict you for treason." I'm like, "What?" I'm just a working agent. Treason? What does this have to do with giving a copy of the tape? I was like, wow. Then the Colonel Martinez called me. "Here, where's my copy?" And I'll never forget that. I was just a Colonel. Wow. This is what happened. And I was embarrassed. I even told the Colonel, "You know what, sir, if I was you, I'd kick all the gringos out of the base, including us. I mean, this is your base." And I could see that his face. So basically, what I did, I gave him the frequency. So then he started intercepting him. But it was just trivial. And it was all jealousy. That's all it was, just jealousy.
Well, I think giving them the frequency of him probably soothed a few things over there. And that was one of the...
they started intercepting him, and that's what led also to, really the last day.
Yeah, that was one of the big breaks, was finding him on that frequency, right, Javier?
Right. That was, yes.
So I guess let's go to that moment. You guys, we're going to fast forward to the actual day, or we're going to fast forward a little bit. You're hunting him. You finally get a few breaks. December 2nd, 1993, was the death of Escobar. Steve, tell us about those days leading up to the capture, and kind of piggyback on some of the stuff that did help in bringing him down.
Well, the excitement was starting to build at the police base there in Medellin at Carlos Holguin School. Everybody felt like, we're getting good leads now. We feel like we've really got a shot at getting him, and the excitement was really building. I'm not kidding you. Everybody was looking forward to it. We were following up there. The Heen guys were living outside the base pretty much. They were always out on the street, so they could respond immediately. And there was one lieutenant there, Lieutenant Hugo Martinez, who happened to be the son of Colonel Hugo Martinez. Colonel Martinez was the head of the search block in Medellin, and his son had taught himself how to use radio directional finding equipment. So, he would sit down and try to explain to me and Javier, and the technical knowledge was way above my IQ. I didn't understand all of it. But, this guy was doing one heck of a job. So on December 2nd, Pablo comes up on the phone, and he's talking to his son, Juan Pablo, and the conversation just keeps going, which was his mistake. That was his fatal flaw right there. Lieutenant Martinez was able to, using his equipment, the first time he sent the Daheen guys to the wrong place. It was a false alert, and so when he checked his equipment, he realized there was a body of water close by. Water affects radio frequency waves, so he recalibrated his instruments. He got Pablo back on the phone, and he was able to triangulate right into where Pablo was. As he's driving down the street, in his own words, he told us, he said, "I looked up, and there's Pablo on the phone looking out the window at me." Now, he says that Pablo did not react when he saw him. And Lieutenant Martinez is in plain clothes, and they're in unmarked cars, but he's holding this antenna out the window in his hand. That's how you use this radio directional finding equipment. But we've always wondered why did Pablo not react to that? Because that's just something that's very suspicious. The only explanation we've ever come up with is that Pablo was so engrossed in his own conversation, he's in his mind, and he's not seeing what's in front of you. I mean, I'm talking to you, but I've got the TV on. I'm looking at the TV, but I'm concentrating on what we're talking about, right? So that allowed Lieutenant Martinez to call in the Daheen unit. They sent a couple guys around back. They used det cord to blow the front door open on the row house, and they engaged Pablo in a firefight, which ultimately led to his death.
You guys really do make a huge effort throughout the entire book, praising the efforts of the Colombian National Police. Talk about that a little bit, Javier, and how big of a role they really did have in this.
They did. Colonel Martinez, a real hero. His boss, I tell people, never got the credit that he deserved. General Octavio Vargas Silva. I call him the architect of the search block. It was his idea. He was the second general in charge of the Colombians. He's the one who put the search block together. He's the one who never gave up. Colonel Martinez ran it. I mean, these guys were just, like I said, outstanding, courageous, and they lost a lot of their guys. And also, and it was personal between Colonel Martinez and Pablo Escobar. I would see the letters that Pablo was threatening to kill his family because he thought Martinez was playing dirty. So Pablo was always threatening Colonel Martinez. So these guys were the ones who really led that fight against Pablo Escobar, and they deserve all the credit of the world.
And in the end, it just was good old-fashioned police work that pretty much did them in as well. And
right.
And I guess
good old-fashioned police work, searching, not giving up. When they located him, like Steve said, and I think there's a point where Colonel Martinez tells his son, "Wait for backup." They go in, in the firefight. I mean, it's a great story. And also, Pablo Escobar only had one bodyguard towards the end. One guy left, where he had, hundreds in the beginning. So one guy left.
Why did he put himself in such a bad position, Steve?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. One is the pressure we were putting on. This is the first time that an entire international drug trafficking organization had been completely decimated. We were taken out as lieutenants, we were taken out as sicarios, the entire organization. So, we were we being the Colombian National Police and Javier and I, we were all shocked that he only had one bodyguard, because here's a guy that used to have 500 bodyguards with him, Everybody expected a much more fierce firefight when he was finally found, because you just expected him to have so much protection around him. Right. He was having trouble getting access to cash, even though he's extremely wealthy. Getting your hands on that wealth sometimes is very difficult when you're in hideout. He knows that if he talks on the phone that the cops are going to be listening. The telephone systems back then operated off of radio waves, so all he had to do to thwart our efforts was change the frequency. But the challenge was he had to get the new frequency to the people that he wanted to talk to. So it's just a combination of factors that led up to him. You know what? Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was fatigued and just tired of running, tired of fighting everybody, tired of being the bad guy. Which, hell, he's probably one of the worst people that's ever walked the face of our earth.
Right, and also his whole organization had been wiped out, been arrested and or killed. So that's just that strategy that we implemented, in that, you just don't go after the leader. You got to wipe out the organization, which is what we did, and that's really what helped.
One hard lesson that you learned, Javier, in your early career at the Ellis Unit death row is that, you write that you learned that all inmates, even the most brutally even the most brutal convicted criminals, are still human beings. I mean, did you think that often when you were hunting for Escobar?
Yep. That was one of the greatest learns I learned there working at the prison. These guys are bad. They're the worst, but they're almost human beings. And I've always stuck with that principle, and it's something that I'll never forget.
And because of his family, they also kind of threw some wrenches later in the sense that rumors that started popping up that, there was the conspiracy that he was still alive. He evaded police because of some of those unlikely things that, that kind of led to him being brought in. But, with his son saying that he also committed suicide, so kind of throwing in some weird wrenches. So determining the cause of his death was really important because of his family. But Steve, I mean, you were there. I mean, there's no doubt in your mind that was Escobar, right?
Absolutely none whatsoever. It was, the first I saw was the Colombian National Police verifying it for me. I went down and looked at the body myself. All those pictures of his body, I took all those pictures. And based on the photographs I've seen of him in the past, it looked to me like him. But, they ended up doing an autopsy, confirmed his fingerprints. But the real telltale sign was when his mother and sister showed up at the site. Because when they saw, originally the sister went over and looked at the bodyguard who had fallen off the roof onto the ground. He was dead. So she went over and looked at him, and she started berating the police officers. Oh, that's not Pablo Escobar. You guys killed the wrong person. You're just as inept as you ever were. You killed the wrong person. It's probably an innocent man. And they just let her go on with her ranting and raving. And when she finally petered out, they said, hey, go take a look up on the roof. So she came up on the roof, and when she saw Pablo, her reaction was shock, was disbelief. That, for me, confirmed it. That was even before the autopsy. There was no question in my mind that was Pablo Escobar. And then the mother's reaction as well, because, you can imagine a mother seeing her son in a position like that. So this theory of committing suicide, I don't buy it at all. If you go back and look at those pictures, you'll see that there are no powder burns on the side of the head, where that was the kill shot that killed Pablo. When there's a suicide by gun, there's, when you fire a weapon, there's small bits of gunpowder that follow the bullet out, and they travel a certain distance before they lose their velocity and fall to the ground. Well, it was close enough. Even if he could hold the gun at arm's length, these pieces of gunpowder would have still hit the side of his head, and they would singe the skin. Some people have posted my pictures, our pictures, all over the internet, so you can take a look at them yourself and see if you can find any burn marks, because you won't see any. So it wasn't a suicide. It's just the son trying to change the legacy of his father.
And I'll back you up on that, Steve. I did do an internet search. I did find the photographs, and there were no nothing behind the ear. So you have mind's eye. Yeah, you have mind's eye confirmation. I'm sure you're waiting for that for the last 30 years. But what was? Now I guess it's time to celebrate. Ding dong, the witch is dead, right? What was Colombia like the days after his death, Javier?
It was. People were excited. They were happy, because everybody knew that the bombing, indiscriminate killing of innocent people was stopping. So it was a great feeling. Colombians were. I always remember, the world press was showing up. There were more interviews when he was killed. They ran a special edition of the famous newspaper that says "Al fin cayó." Finally, he went down. So it was just a feeling of elation. I know the president called, Colombian president, and everybody was congratulating, the Colombian National Police. So it was just a feeling of, we're not going to have the car bombs anymore. We're not going to have the indiscriminate assassinations, the kidnappings, the sicarios. So it was one of those feelings that you'll never will forget.
How was the DEA party? Was it just one big circle of gold that was going on for about 6 hours?
We didn't do the circle of gold, but also on Friday, he was killed on Thursday, and on Friday Javier flew up, and they brought him in on a gunship, and of course he went around, and it was a celebration there in the base because Javier knew these guys for 6 years, right?
Right.
And then they flew us out to the airport. We flew back to Bogota, and we got there. It was probably 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and my wife and another agent's wife had orchestrated this party, and they had balloons and streamers in our office, and they had pizza and beer. And we started partying then, and my wife and I rolled back into the apartment the next morning about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. It was an all-nighter.
Well deserved. And what about you, Javier? Were you partying that night too? Find yourself a lady friend?
We stayed. Yeah, I went. I wasn't there when he was killed. I was in Miami. The ambassador had ordered me.
Right. Sorry.
To go talk to an informant. I tried to argue. He wouldn't have anything. He made me anyway. And the irony is, the informant, I was on the phone when I first see him, and he covers the phone and says, "Javier, they just killed Pablo Escobar." So I get on the flight back, and it's the press of the world. All the Miami people are on the plane. So I show up, and they fly me there the next morning. So I go congratulate Colonel Martinez, all our guys. Steve was there. So we get back. And even though I wasn't there, believe me, it was just a great, great feeling and something you cannot describe.
I was trying not to bring up the Miami thing, and then of course inadvertently I just did that.
No, it's part of it. It's part of it. Happened, and you know what? Like I said, it's the ambassador thought he was doing the right thing, and I'll respect him for that. But I knew that wasn't. But it's like the president, the ambassador's like the president of that country. He orders you, or he can kick you out. So what do you want to do?
Yeah, nothing you can do about that for sure.
Right.
And this is kind of where Narcos kind of leaves us off here. We don't really know what happened much after for you two, and let's wrap this up a little bit just by talking about what did happen after Escobar. Let Javier tell us a little bit about what happened after the death. What in your career, and then a little bit about personal life.
After his death, I stayed for about another 8 months because there were some paperwork type problems, not by headquarters, nothing bad, but I stayed. I left around October, got promoted. Got promoted as a group supervisor for Puerto Rico. So I did 3 years as a supervisor. Then from there, I went to Washington, where I did my headquarters time in D.C. at our headquarters. Then went back to Colombia, and I got promoted as a assistant country attaché. So I was I was the operational boss, so did some of the Cali stuff. Then San Antonio, then got promoted to an SES, which is our biggest, senior executive service, special agent charge of San Francisco, 4 years. Then went back to Puerto Rico as the boss, 3 years, and then Houston, Texas, where I was the boss there for 3 years, and I oversaw the southwest border. So I've had a great career.
And what about you, Steve? Tell us a little bit about your career. And really, Colombia changed your life in a multitude of ways, in ways that you probably never expected with your children.
You're right. My wife and I, we adopted our 2 daughters, Monica and Mandy. We got Monica when she was 8 months old. She's from a little town north of Bogota. She's now 26. Mandy she was 5 months old when we adopted her. She's now 25 and married and has a little girl that's almost 3 years old. And she's from Medellin. Mandy is from Medellin, so that was kind of my gift from Escobar's area anyway. But left Colombia and got stationed in Greensboro, North Carolina, spent a few years there, got promoted first-line supervisor to Atlanta, came to Washington to do my time in headquarters at Special Operations Division, got promoted to Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Executive Assistant to the SAC, and then back out to Atlanta, where I ran the Atlanta Strike Force, and then the administrator promoted me up to the SES ranks, but brought me back into headquarters. So I was over the Office of Special Intelligence, which is all classified. I can't talk about it. But then later took over. I was detailed to the Department of Justice my last few years, and I was the director of the OCDF Fusion Center in Washington.
And truly prestigious careers, and we really can't thank you enough for everything that you did. And in my opinion, just the Escobar was really just a feather in a phenomenal cap, regardless. So, so before I let you go, you guys are retired now. You're what are you doing in between talks? Or how are you enjoying your retirement in between that?
You know what? I think we're working harder now than when we were agents. We spend an awful lot of time on the road doing our shows. We're working with a group that's trying to bring more awareness to counterfeit medications coming to the United States. We've been on Capitol Hill twice in the last 2 years. We've addressed state legislature groups. We're actually negotiating with some professional producers and agents, potential television series. We're working on a thing we call the Lost Clipper, which involves the disappearance and murder of 15 Americans in 1938 over in Micronesia, which we've now tied into the disappearance of Amelia Earhart in 1937. So it's we've got all these different adventures going on, and you know, I didn't realize life after DEA would be so much fun. I miss the camaraderie of the agents there, the people that are your friends. I don't miss the bureaucracy and the paperwork headaches, personnel issues, and things like that. But I never knew life after DEA would be so much fun.
Yeah, who would have thought not having to dodge all those bullets would be so fun, I guess, right? Well, fellas, I really appreciate your time. And honestly, I really just can't thank you enough for everything that you did before, everything that you're doing now in Capitol Hill as well. And really, most of all, for your service and making this world just a little bit safer by being here. Fellas, I really appreciate your time today.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for saying that, Brian. We enjoyed the interview.
I did too. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Pleasure was all mine. And that was Steve Murphy and Javier Peña, legendary DEA agents. We'll be right back with the Mind's Eye Wrap-Up. We're desperately running out of time here as we have reached the Mind's Eye Wrap-Up, but you know we're never fully wrapped up. We always got a little something up our sleeves. I think we're going to stick in one more episode before the year's done, see what it is. TheMindsEyeMedia.com, TheMindsEyeMedia.com. And until then, be well and let well be. I'm your host, DJ BJ Turnoff, signing off for The Mind's Eye. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. This is Z Talk Radio and Stitcher Radio.